Hello, I'm Sean Hughes Kemp.
And I'm Monsignor Charles Minor. Welcome to this edition of Reel to Reel. The expression pro-life is so all-embracing. It covers the problems of handicapped children to senior citizens, the issues of nuclear warfare and capital punishment, as well as the problems of abortion.
Yes, and the issue that has claimed the most lives is, of course, abortion. Joining us in a few minutes will be a woman who once wanted an abortion herself, but is now the co-president of Lutherans for Life.
Continuing with the theme of life, I'll take you to Washington with a group from the parish where I am pastor and experienced with them last month's March for Life. Our feature is the story of a group that teaches children about handicaps through the use of puppets. And we'll meet a different kind of puppet, the singing kind. And now it is a turnabout time. One of our regular viewers of Reel to Reel becomes part of our regular segments. Jean Garton comes to us as the national president for Lutherans for Life. A speaker herself all around the country and Canada on behalf of pro-life, she comes to give us an experience of her own today that we might share with her. And I'm delighted, for one, Jean, that you've come, because one of the issues I constantly face is that people criticize us and say that you pro-life people are so narrowed down to one issue, abortion. And I wish you'd address that immediately for us.
That's a very common criticism and an unjustified one. To be pro-life is to be concerned about all of those other issues of hunger and war and capital punishment and so on. But the crisis in time today demands that we all focus on unborn human life. In the last 10 years, we have not legally starved people to death or legally destroyed them through nuclear war. Less than a dozen people, as sad as that is, have died through capital punishment. But we have, in the last 10 years, destroyed through abortion 12 million living but unborn human beings. And if it were not for the pro-life movement focusing on that segment of human life, there would be no other people to speak for the unborn. And as we educate on the value of life of the most defenseless in the human family, it's our hope and prayer that it will sensitize people to all of the other life issues. But we must begin with the most defenseless of all.
The other restriction that comes to us, especially as priests and Catholics, is that it's a Catholic issue. You're just pushing one Catholic problem on the rest of the world.
That's a common piece of propaganda and very untrue. I think our country one day will be very grateful for the public witness of the Catholic Church on this issue. But at the moment, I think we need to understand that many, many Protestants as well as Jewish people are very pro-life, but that dimension does not make news in the media, and it does not contribute to the idea that this is a sectarian issue. I was speaking at a college, and a young man said, "Listen, lady, we don't want your Catholic morality forced down our throats." And I said, "But I'm not Catholic." He said, "What are you?" I said, "I'm Lutheran." He said, "Well, it's the same thing." Well, for that young man and others like him, it is a way to avoid the fact that we have made killing private. And as long as we can appeal to prejudice and bigotry, then we don't have to come to grips with that reality that we're destroying human life. There are Lutherans for life, Presbyterians for life, even atheists for life. So it is a universal issue, which makes it the most Catholic, with a small c, most Catholic issue of all.
Jean, could you give us an idea of what personally brought you to such an involvement in this issue?
Yes, definitely. I was pregnant and 40 and didn't want to be either. Couldn't do anything about being 40, but believed I should do something and could do something about being pregnant. I was interested in the woman's movement and believed it was a woman's right to control her own body. So I sought an abortion, but no doctor would provide me with one except a back alley abortionist. And since the law prohibited that at that time, it served as a restraint for me. Well, by the time I visited doctors and could not get an abortion, it was too late. I saw the pregnancy to term and received a very great blessing and a dear joy in a second son. But I promised myself I would aid other women, and so I joined a movement to liberalize the abortion laws. And as I attended the meetings, we were taught never to give any humanity to what was in the womb. Always talk about blob or tissue, and always talk about the woman's body. Never give any body to whatever that tissue was. And I was uncomfortable with that kind of deceptive language. So I decided I would develop an argument for abortion that was based on truth and evidence. And so I researched unborn life. I studied documents from geneticists, pathologists, the history of abortion, the effect on women, and discovered that abortion is, in fact, taking a separate human life, and that the rhetoric we were using was simply doublespeak and language that lied. And so after going through the agonizing evolution of recognizing my position had been in error, and then having to change my mind, and then having to publicly speak about what I knew to be true, I met with a group of Christian women in my community and shared my change with them, and that began a speaking project.
I understand that you had a rather tragic irony in your life in that you've already lost one son. Could you tell us a little about that?
Our first son was Dean, who was part of our plan, and a son very much wanted. And a few years ago, he was going to the aid of a woman who was being attacked, and the man turned around and fired bullets into Dean's chest, and he died within minutes. Dean was unwanted and inconvenient for that man, and his solution was destruction. And I only realized then that that same solution was the one I was using for the second son. I did not want him. He was inconvenient, and so in my mind, God would understand, and I was justified in destroying that life. And I guess that's the lesson I learned and want to share with other people, that at no point in time in our individual lives do we have the view God has. He knew back then when he sent that child, that second child, to us, we would need him and he would become a very wanted child.
But Jean, with all your involvement and your own development, has legislation helped us at all with all the injunctions we seem to be hearing about?
We have been very successful in the various states and communities, passing legislation, getting regulatory legislation. But you're right, a court, a judge will declare it unconstitutional, or a governor will veto that legislation. So the people have also switched a great deal, it seems to me, as more and more are realizing we do need legislation, and we have a strong grassroots support for this. I have great hope that eventually it will be accomplished, but I think we need to put it in the perspective of history. We realize it took 11 years and a civil war to even begin to deal with the rights of black people. We've been involved now 10 years, 10 long, hard years, and we certainly don't want a civil war over this. But we do need education while we're seeking legislation, and we need supportive services for women in the meantime.
Where do you see the support coming from that we should really energize?
For legislation or everything?
Everything.
I see it coming from people who know and know the truth. who need to speak out. That abortion is unacceptable as it is obvious through every survey. But now those of us who know the truth, who are committed to human life and its value, need to get involved.
Jean Garton, thank you so much for Lutherans for Life, and thanks for what you do for us today. Sean, we appreciate your input and your being with us today, but all of us, we just heard Jean say, need to become concerned and really intense about the idea pro-life. For truly, when you are pro-life, you are really for wholeness. Coming up, we'll continue our discussion of the pro-life issue with a report on the recent March on Washington that I attended, along with a group from my parish.
We will also hear the song Bread Upon the Water by the Crusader Puppet Company.
Well, there are people never receiving anything from God at all. Oh, they are shaken from their believing. When they don't see results, they quickly fall. But don't you waver, keep on a-living, in the way God wants you to. Don't get discouraged, keep on a-giving, soon it will come back to you. Keep on casting your bread upon the water, soon it's gonna come back home on every way. Keep on casting your bread upon the water, soon it's gonna come back home on every way. Good measure pressed down, shaken together, running over, soon it's gonna come back home on every way. Keep on working, seeking the kingdom, instead of working for your need. Keep on sharing the love of Jesus. You know growing comes from planting seeds. Now keep on casting your bread upon the water, soon it's gonna come back home on every way. Now keep on casting your bread upon the water, soon it's gonna come back home on every way. Good measure pressed down, shaken together, running over, soon it's gonna come back home on every way.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. On a very cold January day that threatened to snow, parishioners from St. Francis Cabrini Church and I went by bus to Washington, where we joined thousands of others from around the country for what over the past 10 years has been the annual March for Life. Slogans such as Save the Whales and No Nukes excite a lot of people to action these days, but the fact that 4,000 babies are aborted each day in this country alone draws larger crowds every year to the White House and Capitol for a quiet, orderly march in protest of the 1973 Supreme Court ruling that made abortion on demand a constitutional right.
Long time ago, a little child was born. He grew to be a man who could calm a storm. Well, he came with a mighty message, and he could walk out on the sea. He came in the name of God, set us free. He came in the name of God. He came for the children and everyone. He told me about the book of love, said to follow the dove and I'd be free. He came in the name of God. He came for the children and everyone. He told me about the book of love.
We believe that each child is created in the image of God, and only God has the right to give and take life.
We have to continue the marching, continue the letter writing, continue coming down and talking to people.
I'm pro-life because it's really the only logical position to take.
We are the largest lobbying group that is not paid.
People are coming from all over the country to show that we're still committed to the pro-life cause. We're still willing to work for it.
There were a lot more people than last year, and I think that it proves that more people are more concerned.
He came in the name of God. He came for the children and everyone. He told me about the book of love, said to follow the dove and I'd be free. The people were so afraid.
Have you ever been uncomfortable upon meeting a person with a handicap? Well, I guess most of us have been, particularly children. Sometimes a wheelchair or a cane or even a hearing aid can serve as a barrier between us and the person. In Washington, D.C., there's a group that is teaching children about handicaps in a very unique way, and in the process teaches us all something about human relations. In this piece, keep a careful eye on the shadows behind the puppets.
Hey, excuse me.
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yeah, do you know what time it is?
Oh, sure. Just give me a sec. I'm going to check. It's 2:30 on the dot.
Hey! How'd you do that? You didn't even look at your watch. How do you know what time it is?
I can't see, so I have this special Braille watch. You know, they make Braille watches for blind kids.
You mean you? Why? Oh, you are blind?
Yeah, I'm blind.
Meet Ronaldo Rodriguez, a 10-year-old who is almost totally blind, but plays baseball like a champ. He wears glasses because he can distinguish light from shadow, and he walks with a cane. His 10-year-old friend, Brenda Dabrowski, a normal child of average intelligence, is fascinated by his explanation of how he tells time with his Braille watch. Ronaldo and Brenda are just 2 of the 17 characters that comprise this most innovative puppet troupe, known the world over as the Kids on the Block. The kids come from all corners of life. Some have physical disabilities, others have mental disabilities, and some are not handicapped at all. This unique combination allows the puppets to reach their audience in a way that could never be gleaned through a textbook alone. The brainchild of special education teacher Barbara Aiello, the Kids on the Block communicate a sensitivity and an understanding about problems unique to handicapped children.
As a professional, I realized that it's a non-disabled world out there, and something had to be done to bring disabled and non-disabled kids together more effectively.
So 5.5 years ago, Aiello constructed her first handicapped puppet.
I think a lot of good ideas grow out of necessity and sometimes out of frustration. And the Kids on the Block were born of my frustration as a special education teacher.
When the law allowing the mainstreaming of handicapped children into regular classrooms was passed, Aiello felt the need more than ever to integrate the 2 groups. She knew no law could mandate attitude change, but realized the power of puppets.
Nobody told children never to talk to puppets. So even though they had a lot of fears about real disabled people, the puppets broke down the initial barrier and allowed them to feel then more comfortable with real people.
Most puppets are between 3 and 4 feet tall, and all are created, assembled, and given life in her Arlington, Virginia workshop.
They all wear real kids' clothes, size 2 clothes, size 5 shoes. Mainly because we could make the costumes here in our workshop, but what we wanted to do was buy clothes off the rack the way parents buy clothes for their children, so that the children in the audience would be able to say, hey, I got a baseball jacket like that, or, I got a vest like that. In our workshop, people are actually making the puppets. And it's not really an assembly line. It isn't like all of a sudden 5 people are making legs and somebody else is stamping out hands, but there's a real creative process operating there.
Another creative arm of the Kids on the Block are the puppeteers, all of whom have strong backgrounds in working with the disabled.
It's important that we do it that way because each of our performers answers questions from the audience, and they need to be well-versed in handicaps. And we feel that we can take a month to teach them about puppetry, but it would take much longer to teach them about disability.
Puppeteer Lisa Pritchard helps Aiello write some of the scripts. Many of the ideas come from a panel of 31 disabled Americans.
Sometimes people ask me, hey, Ronaldo, if you're blind, do you have a seeing-eye dog? And I say, no, I don't have a seeing-eye dog because you have to be 18 years old to have one. And you have to go to a place like up in Morristown, New Jersey to learn how to use your dog. So you know what I did, Brenda? I figured if I can't have a seeing-eye dog, then I'm going to train my cat to be a seeing-eye cat. But there was only one thing. She led me to one place. You know where? Her litter box!
In performing daily for children all over the world, the puppeteers find that they must not only be theatrically good and artistically polished, but they also have to be educationally sound, because they are talking about a very sensitive area. Dressed in black from head to toe, they perform in the Japanese tradition of bunraku, so they are in full view of the audience as they manipulate the puppets. One of the favorites is Mark Riley, a blue-eyed, freckled-faced 11-year-old who insists on calling his wheelchair a cruiser. Mark has cerebral palsy.
Yeah, I call it CP for short. Anyway, it means that your muscles are stiff. And that's why my legs, the muscles in my legs don't work, and the ones in my mouth don't work too good either. I got the double trouble.
Although many times young children are told not to stare or ask embarrassing questions to someone disabled, the puppets invite questions from their audience, a crucial part of their performance.
What's it like to have cerebral palsy?
What's it like to have cerebral palsy? Well, it's not so bad, really, because a lot of times people think that if you have cerebral palsy or you're blind or something like that, you sit at home and cry all day. Hey, that's not true. Now, I can do lots of things. I go to a regular school. I play in a soccer team. I can ride a bike. And I think when I grow up, I'm going to be either a wheelchair basketball player, or a computer programmer.
We show honest curiosity, sensitive questions, sensitive behavior on the part of the non-disabled kid in the hopes that these kids will learn and then apply it in real situations.
One of the newer puppets is an epileptic named Brian, who helps dispel many of the myths and misconceptions people have about epilepsy.
How do you catch it? You can't catch epilepsy. It's just something that happens. Sometimes if you get in a real bad accident and you hit your head, well then sometimes that can make you have epilepsy. But the doctors don't know why I have epilepsy. One day when I was 8 years old, I just had a seizure. And they don't know why. They think it could have been something that happened when my mom was pregnant with me.
Every scene includes at least one non-disabled puppet on stage with a disabled one to show the children that they too can really be friends with someone a little different than themselves.
Oh, Mark, can I ask you something kind of personal?
Oh, something personal, huh? Oh, sure, go ahead. I don't mind when people ask me questions.
Okay, here goes. Mark, how do you know?
I didn't get what you want to know. Come on.
Okay. Mark, how do you go to the bathroom?
When you said personal, you meant real personal, didn't you? Hey, it's all right, Mel. I don't mind.
I don't think that disability is always detracts from one's personality. I think in many cases it enhances it. And that positive side of disability needs to be shared with non-disabled people. Our goals as performers, when we put those puppets up on the stage and start doing this, is to show not the world as it is, but the world as it could be.
Because kids are different. We don't even look the same. Some kids speak different languages. We all have a different name. Kids are different, but if you look inside, you'll see that tall kid, that small kid, that deaf kid, that blonde kid, just like you and me.
When you go from heavy discussion of pro-life and pro-choice and come upon the lovely scene of hale and healthy children as well as handicapped and hardy ones, you've got to wonder about the quality of life we are seeking.
That's true. And if a society can be judged by the way it protects its weakest member, whether it be the unborn child or the disabled, then how are we to judge America today? We hope you'll join us next week when our guests will discuss the topic of infertility.
And we'll meet a couple who have found a way to raise smarter children. They tell us it works for them.
That and more next week on Reel to Reel. Thanks for being with us. Good night.
Good night, and God bless you.